Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the Complex Trauma Training Center. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Are you a mental health professional looking to deepen your clinical expertise in healing complex trauma? We're thrilled to announce our 2025 NARM Therapist Trainings, designed to provide you with transformative training in the neuroaffective relational model. In 2025, we're offering 2 online cohorts for the Level 2 NARM Therapist Trainings. Our spring online cohort spans January to November 2025, and the summer online cohort runs May to December 2025. Through this advanced clinical training, you'll learn how to confidently and compassionately heal the impact of adverse childhood experiences, complex trauma, and CTTC. You'll gain specialized trauma-informed training that supports the resolution of attachment, developmental, relational, cultural, and intergenerational trauma. Enrollment is open to licensed psychotherapists, counselors, social workers, and other licensed mental health professionals, as well as graduate trainees and interns working toward licensure. Join us and experience the integration of a neurobiologically informed clinical approach that promotes post-traumatic growth. Become part of a community where mindfulness meets clinical expertise, and embody professional and personal growth as a catalyst for transformation in your practice and community. Visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com to register for the 2025 NARM Therapist Training that best fits your schedule. We hope you will join us to learn how NARM can transform your practice. And now for our interview. Lisa Gillispie is a licensed professional clinical counselor in private practice in Columbus, Ohio. Lisa came to counseling as a second career following 25 years as a trauma-informed bodyworker specializing in craniosacral therapy. Lisa is a NARM master therapist, somatic experiencing practitioner, and lead training assistant for the Complex Trauma Training Center. She is also one of the trainers who teaches the Introduction to NARM webinars offered by CTTC. Lisa loves supporting other professionals in developing their skills for working with developmental trauma. As a single parent to 2 kiddos, Lisa has found NARM invaluable for helping her grow her ability to meet the challenges of parenting with humor and kindness. Please enjoy this conversation with Lisa Gillispie. All right, Lisa Gillispie, welcome to Transforming Trauma.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'm really glad to be here.
So happy to have you. So happy to have this conversation. I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And as you know, we always like to start by asking our guests what you would like listeners to get out of our time together.
Yeah, I was kind of reflecting on this, having listened to the podcast and knowing this question is one of the themes we orient to. I think what I would really hope listeners get is take this as an invitation to connect more to their own humanity and to see how that opens them up to be more available to connection to others. Because I think we're really losing a lot of that humanity, and it is so important and so essential these days. And it's just it's one of the things I love most about NARM, quite honestly.
Thank you. I felt my heart drop into that, even just as you were naming that. Feels really good to be in connection with folks who understand the importance of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to know a little bit. I mean, we've been in the community together for a while, and I realize I haven't heard much of your story. So I'm excited to hear more. If you could share with listeners where you are in the world and also just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am in Columbus, Ohio, in the United States, and I was a body worker for over 20 years. So I specialized in craniosacral therapy and really loved the body-mind integration. And I was trained in that modality for supporting people and working with emotions that were causing constriction in the body. And that was really fascinating to me, how emotions would be held in the body and then show up in different ways for people, contributing to pain or tension patterns that they experienced. And during that time, I was remembering one of my trainings, there was Peter Levine's book, Waking the Tiger, on the book table outside of the training. And I was fascinated by that. And fast forward many years later, the somatic experiencing training came here locally. And so I went through that training and then had some connection with Brad Kammer in that. And then also Brad came to Columbus and taught an intro to developmental trauma and then later an intro to NARM. And I remember sitting in the developmental trauma workshop he was teaching and just feeling like these light bulbs were going off and having this realization of how much people's developmental trauma really informed how they navigated more event-specific trauma. And it really intrigued me because I was seeing that in my practice, that people would come in and maybe they would have had a car accident or a fall, and we would be working with that from a bodywork perspective and a SE perspective. And there would at times inevitably be something developmental that we would start to bump into. And so having Brad share that and give some perspective on that, it was like, oh, now I'm starting to see where I'm bumping into some of my learning edges with that. So then the NARM training came to Columbus, and that worked out really well because the first module was about a month before I gave birth to my second child. So not having to travel during that time was really important and necessary. And then during that training, I made the decision to start grad school to get my master's in clinical mental health counseling, and was lucky enough to go into grad school with my SE training and most of my NARM training, and just felt incredibly fortunate to be able to lean on those experiences and that knowledge throughout grad school.
I love that. I get so excited when I hear that someone has come into this work at the beginning of grad school and counseling and all of that, that you found NARM and somatic experiencing right at the beginning. That's so cool. So cool.
I feel really fortunate.
Yeah. So can we rewind a little bit more and actually ask, how did you get into the field of bodywork? Because generally my understanding is that someone comes into that field too with some reasons.
Yes, I was a dance major in college, and that was a real passion of mine. And I did not have the typical ballet body. So the track that I was more on was choreography and teaching. So in college, I suffered an injury. I tore ligaments in my ankle my freshman year, right before Chorus Line auditions, which was the one musical I've always wanted to be in. So I still auditioned. I was in a cast during the audition, but I still showed up and did my audition. I had recurring injuries from that injury. And so by the end of my junior year, I was pretty burned out and decided to pull the plug on my dance degree. And I had some experience with massage therapy during that time that had been quite helpful. So I thought, well, if I can't be a dancer, then I can at least learn body work. And at that time, I was going to focus on sports massage with the intention of supporting other dancers with that. So I could still keep my foot in the dance world, but in a little different way than I had originally planned. So that's what took me to massage school. And then during massage school, we had an intro to craniosacral therapy. And I was intrigued and frustrated at the same time because it's a pretty subtle form of body work, and it was eluding me, and other students in my class were getting it and feeling all sorts of things, and I was not. And then it was one of the first continuing ed trainings that came to Columbus, and I thought, all right, why not? I'll give it a try. And I absolutely fell in love with it during that longer training. And it really hooked me because of the mind-body emphasis and also the emphasis on anatomy. And I love geeking out on anatomy and learning about the body and how it fits together and works together. And I remember having this realization that I could study this for the rest of my life and never, ever be bored because there was so much to learn and so much nuance to it. And it just was so satisfying to be absorbing this information and then getting to work with clients and see clients having the benefits of that as well.
This is so fun to hear this journey. We have some things in common. And so one of the things I often will ask is like, what led you to working with complex trauma? And you mentioned that as you're working with the body, a lot of times things would come up. But I'm curious if you could say any more about that.
Yeah. It's one of those things that I remember even as a teen reading books. I don't know if you're familiar with Bernie Siegel. He was a doctor. I don't even know if he's still alive or not, but he was kind of on the leading edge of mind-body connections in terms of physical health. And his area specialty was working with cancer patients. And so he wrote several books on kind of the influence of the mind and the emotions on people's health and what helped cancer patients have successful outcomes and what maybe contributed to less successful outcomes. And I was fascinated by that. And I enjoyed reading Barbara Brennan, who is a more esoteric, energetic expert looking at auras and energy fields. And so all of this really fascinated me. And it was kind of a journey to answer the question. And I'm not even quite sure what sparked the question in the first place, but this recognition that people could have really, really incredibly heartbreaking, challenging experiences and use those experiences to fuel, to fertilize, to grow, to move them forward in their life in a really meaningful way. And then other people, it would just devastate them. And it was like they couldn't come back from those experiences. And I was trying to solve that riddle. And so there was the bodywork aspect of things. There was the emotional area of focus that craniosacral had in the more advanced trainings and seeing how those started to weave together. And then that led me to somatic experiencing and kind of having a deeper understanding of how the physiology responds to shock trauma and how we can support people through that. But then also it's like, what's the foundation that somebody experiences shock trauma from, and what's already been set in place in somebody's psyche and their emotions and their physiology that either supports them through really challenging life experiences or makes life more challenging for them. So I remember considering taking the training and reading Dr. Heller's book, Healing Developmental Trauma, and just all of these light bulbs going off at a long flight. It was my first trip to Hawaii, and I brought that book with me and I was just soaking it up and underlining all of these sections in the book and all of these light bulbs going off about my parents and other family members and just making sense of things that I had had some experience with directly, but now it was like these pieces were falling into place and there was a clarity there that I found so helpful and supportive in terms of better understanding these very important people to me and also better understanding my own self and how I move through the world and how I engage in relationships with people for better or worse.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's cool how you were kind of already starting to bring all these pieces together in your work and body work. And then as you're entering into this field that led you into this new way of showing up in your work. You smiled, so I wonder if there's something else you want to say there.
Well, it does feel like as kind of twisty, curvy as the journey has been to this point, I feel like, my dance background trained me to be a keen observer of people's body and how they're holding their bodies and moving in their body. And then, that really supported me as a body worker and kind of noticing as soon as somebody walked into the room, oh, this shoulder's, this arm isn't swinging like their other arm is when they're walking down the hall with me. And, having the ability to track more subtle movements in people. And then, you start to tune into, even things like, oh, somebody's holding their breath now, or, oh, something just shifted. So I think all of that was really incredibly helpful in this next stage of my professional work as a counselor and getting to also the art of holding space and being with people. And craniosacral, sometimes you're talking, but a lot of the times you're sitting with somebody in silence and developing the capacity to be in silence with somebody and presence. I feel like all of those qualities were things that I had the good fortune of developing and practicing and carry with me into my counseling work.
I love that.
I think another big shift has been being able to pressure myself less. And I mean, there's so many things that have shifted from orienting in this way to myself and the work. But I'm kind of an expert in pressuring myself. It's one of my superpowers. And there are certainly times when it comes in handy, but it hasn't worked so well as kind of a default go-to way of being. It's not particularly sustainable. So having more of a experience or understanding of developmental trauma and my own need for utilizing that strategy has really helped me have more choice around when I use it, be able to use it less. And when I do start to rely on that familiar refrain, so to speak, I can be curious about what's driving that. There's something Brad said recently, I can't remember which training it was that I was assisting, but he was speaking to this theme of, often clients might say something like, oh man, here I am, this issue again. I thought I'd already worked through it, or I thought I'd already processed my grief around this, and I can't believe it's here again. And I'm just so sick of it and want to be done with it. And Brad was talking about, of course, we're going to revisit things. We're in a different place, our own selves. We're going to relate to something differently. We're going to be able to connect to it in a different way and process another facet of it in a way that we didn't previously have the capacity for. And there was just something in hearing him talk about it this time that I was in a place of more receptivity and just like, oh, of course. And isn't it kind of ridiculous that we would have this expectation of ourselves that I am going to process this and it's going to be a one and done kind of thing. And never again will it emerge. And, I'm holding the tenderness of course, I might want that. And also the but sweetie, here we are again. And, it doesn't mean you failed the first time around. It just means that there's something more there's another gold to mine in this. And there's more richness and there's something new to learn about myself in the process. And isn't that something that is exciting and rich and incredibly meaningful? And just to me, that's really how I want to relate to myself, is this, I'm on this journey, this lifetime journey with myself. And where I once had this illusion of someday I will arrive and whatever that meant. But then this realization I'll never arrive when I'm dead.
And thank goodness, we don't want to be stagnant.
Right. And so as I engage with myself in that way, it really lends itself so nicely for this ripple effect of engaging with my clients in that way. And we get to bring curiosity to it and have a greater understanding, and that supports our subjectivity and who we are as unique and complex humans, and that there's less pressure to be perfect. The stakes aren't as high as they once were. Children to now as an adult, I'm relating to myself differently. I'm able to have more understanding of some of these dynamics with clients. And I'm thinking of one client where the theme of procrastination was a really troubling experience for them and had impacts for them in their personal life and in their work life as well. And we could have addressed it very behaviorally and created a plan and looked at, what are the specific strategies that they could start to implement to block out time and to put it on their schedule and make a to-do list and all of those things. And I found it so fascinating that we actually didn't make that a focus of our treatment, but instead we were looking at how they were relating to themselves, these themes of pressure, this need to be perfect in order to have a sense of connection and having some understanding of what those strategies grew out of. And I remember one session, this client brought up how they had gone on a trip, and instead of being on their phone the whole time and scrolling the whole time, they were able to interact with the person that they were on the trip with. And it was an organic process for them. It wasn't like, oh, all right, I'm going to work really hard to put my phone down and engage and not do this distraction avoidance strategy that they had. And it was fascinating to me how when we addressed or looked at and explored together and got curious about how they were relating to themselves and others and their strategies and their adaptations, that there was this organic shift in their behavior that was more in alignment with what they were really wanting for themselves.
And that's a great segue. So you've been in the NARM world for several years now, and now you're in a position where you've been on the training staff and now you're training to be a trainer. So I'd love to hear more about kind of your journey into NARM in that door in the TA world, and then kind of all these steps that you've been taking. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I have done a lot of assisting. I was a training assistant for cranial sacral trainings. I then had the opportunity to teach some of the cranial sacral trainings for a smaller organization. And then after I completed my somatic experiencing, I did some assisting of the beginning and intermediate modules of somatic experiencing. So the teaching part of my world has always been something really, really important, and I love it. I've always looked for opportunities to engage in it. And I was reflecting on this the other day after one of our recent trainings that I assisted. And I remembered that I played violin before I got into ballet. And I don't remember how it happened, but I do remember I taught violin lessons to my neighbors. I think I was around 10 years old. I set up a private teaching
That's great. I love it.
situation. It was a great way to make some money.
Yeah.
And then in college, I volunteered to fill in for one of my dance professors who was in a car accident, pretty bad car accident, and wasn't able to teach for several weeks. And the professor who was covering his classes was pretty understandably overwhelmed. And one day after class, I said, "Hey, Suzanne, if you'd like me to teach the class, I'd be happy to do that." I have no idea I don't know, the bravery, the naivety, the whatever it was that caused me to do that. And she took me up on it. And so I, for a few weeks, taught the college level, whatever, ballet class to my fellow students and classmates and loved it. It was just like coming home. And so then after that, I was offered a job at the local ballet studio, which was a much better opportunity than waiting tables at Pizza Hut. So I was thrilled to be able to make that transition. And so I did that throughout my college years. And then as a body worker, I was also looking for ways to teach. So I'd mentor people who were wanting to deepen their understanding, and we would work on clients together, and I would kind of highlight some of the things that I was noticing. It was also an incredible way for me to hone my own skills, because it's one thing to have a sense of something. It's another to be able to articulate it and to be able to convey it to somebody in a way that they can get it and start to connect the dots for themselves. So that was always a really fun challenge for me of how can I put words to this in a way that actually lands for somebody. And then the same with the assisting. And with assisting, it's such a gratifying experience to journey with students throughout different modules and to see where someone is in that more beginning stage. And, unfortunately, so many people have experienced educational trauma. And so there's understandably a lot that comes up for people when they're starting a training. And so to do the best that we can as a training team to support the students in a meaningful, helpful way that they can really be in a place in themselves to take in and absorb the learning. It's so gratifying to see that unfolding of students and see them being able to take it in and see how that impacts them. And then for the past year now, I've been one of the facilitators for the Introduction to NARM workshop that happens monthly. And that's been a lot of fun to get to do that. And again, it's just helping me deepen my understanding of the material, which is fun to see how that then shows up as a training assistant and also with my clients. So I love teaching for many reasons, but one of them selfishly, or I don't know, is because it really supports me in getting the material more embodied and more in my bones, so to speak, so that I can better facilitate the learning of others in the process. And so I am incredibly excited and honored to get to be able to start on this journey of becoming a trainer and of learning the material at an even deeper level to be able to teach it and share it with other people so that they can go out and impact their corner of the world and personally and professionally.
Yeah. This isn't a question that I had given you heads up on.
Okay.
So answer this however, don't answer it, whatever you want to do. I'm curious for you, because you named, being in this teaching role, like not everyone's going to want to be a teacher. Not everyone's going to want to be on that track. But I'm curious, can you name, like, what are some of the things that you find yourself learning and teaching that maybe are different than even being a TA or being a therapist, a psychotherapist alone?
I think there's so many skills that a trainer needs to have in terms of not just the knowledge of the material and how to best convey it, but also how to hold the container for the students, the container for the training assistants, how to teach to a group of, depending on the class size, 30 to 60 to 80. I mean, we've had some trainings where there's been 100 students present, and obviously we can't teach to every single student individually, but how to finesse the material or connect to the material in a meaningful way that resonates with as many students as possible. And part of that is also, how can I be present and connected to myself? Because that's an essential ingredient to all of this. If I'm pressuring myself, if I'm trying to make sure I'm showing up as the best teacher ever, then that really takes me out of connection with myself, and I lose the connection with the very people that I'm most trying to have a rapport and a connection with. So there's those qualities, those skills that I think I am excited to continue to develop and also to deepen my understanding of the material. Like it will inevitably highlight areas where I'm not as strong in the material, which is also exciting because that's like, oh, now I have this opportunity to dig in a little deeper. And even in the experiential consults that I do with students, questions will come up that I'm like, that's such a great question. And I think I know the answer, or maybe I have no idea what the answer is. But then the excitement of kind of deepening my understanding of it, and maybe I have an understanding of it, but articulating it is the trickier part. So there's all of these really, to me, exciting opportunities to be able to deepen, embody, understand, and then be in a meaningful connection with the students. And I think that also is one of the most gratifying things to me about teaching is the ripple effect that it has, and that people are having really meaningful experiences in the training that they're taking out into their personal lives, that's impacting how they interact with, I mean, for me, speaking for myself, it's impacted how I interact with my kids. It's impacted my relationships with others. It's impacted my practice in terms of including myself in my practice and not just making it all about my clients, as important as they are and as much as I care about them. It's like, this has to work for both people in order for me to have a sustainable practice, and then how that carries into the teaching world as well. And it's interesting because that is one thing that I have noticed. I feel not that there aren't times when I am impacted pretty significantly by a client's experience and have some of my own strong emotions in response to that, or grief around what somebody has experienced. But there's also this sense of trusting the process and trusting that just because somebody experienced incredibly heartbreaking, devastating experiences doesn't mean that there isn't capacity for healing, doesn't mean that things can't be different. And it's more like I can rest in that instead of, okay, now I have to work really, really hard to help them feel better, to help them get relief, to make sure that they are not experiencing whatever they are experiencing. Like there's more space now that I feel of trusting in my own self, trusting in the model, trusting in our inherent healing process. And I think that that's really helped me be less susceptible to burnout, and that efforting. I mean, that's such another well-honed strategy. I will work really, really hard. I will figure it out. I will do whatever it takes. And that's not particularly sustainable. And when we combine that with these really tender, heartbreaking situations that many of our clients have experienced, it can tug on us significantly and really lead to us taking on things in a way that is not good for us, and also not good for our clients. Like it doesn't really ultimately at the end of the day serve either one of us.
Yeah, that's helpful just for me to think about. And you're naming, this has to work for both of us, whether it be in a therapist, client, patient situation, or in even a teaching situation. So I don't know if that's anything that you've talked about in your training yet, but if you're feeling something, how do you work with that? If something is off?
One thing that comes to mind is the recognition that I'm part of the equation with my clients. And while I always want to orient my work to clients to being in service to them and their process, there's also a recognition of I'm part of the equation. I matter in this equation, and I get to include myself in that. So if something isn't working for me, I get to be curious about that. And maybe that's some of my own personal work that I need to do, or maybe that's something that I need to shift in how I am working with a client that better supports me to show up in my authenticity and in my fullness, and ultimately is going to better support clients in their work. So that's one thing. I remember doing an active coaching with Brad and Ricky, one of our other training assistants, and it was kind of this light bulb moment. And I forget what it was that Brad said, but I was kind of beating myself up for not feeling more confident or okay with material that a client was bringing up, instead of recognizing and just owning, acknowledging that for whatever reason, maybe I wasn't able to hold the space that day in the way that I wanted to. Like, I'm a human. I'm not always going to show up in a session with my full capacity and firing at 100% as I would like to. And if I make myself wrong for that, then that has an impact on my relationship to myself. And that has an impact on how I am relating and able to be with my clients. And kind of going back to the humanity piece of things, it's like I get to be a human as a therapist and continue to develop my skills, continue to do my own work, continue to develop my capacity to be with challenging situations with clients. And I'm not ever going to do it perfectly. And that's okay. There's like more acceptance to that in this moment for me versus like, okay, well, I got to work really hard then. I got to make sure I read this book, and oh, that book will give me the, or that course will, or if I just do 50 bazillion consults, then.
I really appreciate you giving us a peek behind the curtain of like, yeah, that's real. That happens. Mm-hmm. And what do you do with it? And, right. And that's part of the learning that you're in right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So thank you for speaking to that. So for anyone in the NARM community, or maybe they're not, maybe they're on the outside, they're kind of like peeking in to see if this is something they want to engage with. Is there anything you can leave with our listeners? Anything that you can share about your experience? Anything that feels impactful, important that you might want to share?
Yeah, I feel I could take this personally. I could take this client-wise. I feel, and it's both really, that coming back to what I was hoping for at the beginning in terms of this connection to our own humanity, I feel like one of the greatest things that I have gained from NARM is more willingness to be with all aspects of myself, even the aspects that I think I should be done with or should have been polished up by now, should have been eradicated by now. It's like, oh, this is still me. This is part of me. And just by virtue of this being part of me, like I deserve to have all of me included. And that willingness to connect to my own humanity, my own messiness, my own vulnerability, even when it is really sometimes not my favorite thing, but to still be willing to be in relationship with it has been so profound in my relationship to myself. And then, as I was talking about, kind of the ripple effect and how that helps me show up with my kids and my relationship with my two children, and also then how that shows up as I sit with clients and I'm willing to be with the hard stuff that so many of them have experienced, and notice the impulse I have to, could I fix it? Could I tie this up in a neat little bow before the session finishes so that they're not in this place of muddiness and lack of clarity and even discomfort, and recognizing that there is trusting the process, that this is part of their process, and this recognition of who am I to deny them this aspect of their process? Who am I to say that this should be tied up into some neat and tidy bow? Like, I know for me, some of the most impactful things have been when I was allowed to be in my own messiness and somebody wasn't trying to fix it or make it go away. And that was really so important to me because, as a kid, there wasn't space for that. That stirred up things for my parents. It wasn't okay to be sad. It wasn't okay to be angry. And so I learned to tidy that up quite well. Thank you very much. So it's been quite the process that, I don't have to tidy it up. And I get to be with all aspects of myself, and I get to show up as me with my clients, and the incredible, beautiful, profound, powerful things that happened that I get to be with from that space is just really, I feel so incredibly fortunate to get to do the work that I do and get to sit with the people and see the beauty that we all have in our vulnerability and in our authenticity. It's like the more you get to know someone and the more the territory gets filled in and colored, it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And it's these pieces that we're most trying to hide, but it's the pieces that are
Right.
the most impactful. And I feel like that's something I've learned in witnessing students and my fellow colleagues in the NARM community, that like the vulnerability and the openness is where the beauty really happens.
Lisa, thank you so much for bringing your whole self, all aspects, your heart. I've really enjoyed this time getting to know a bit more of you. Gosh, it just makes me want to be able to have these conversations with every single person in the NARM community. But I love that we've been in this space together for like years now. And so many of these things that you've shared, I haven't known. But what I feel like I have had a sense of is your heart. And I appreciate that you've brought that so much to our community. And thank you for sharing all of this today. Is there any way that folks can get in touch with you if there's something that you've named that is relevant for them? Where can folks find you?
Yeah, I have my website, columbusmindbody.com, and my contact information is there. They can reach me through there. And I also post occasionally on Facebook. I have a Facebook page, Lisa Gillispie LPCC. They can find me there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing, and I'm excited to see even more of you at the front of the room.
Thank you.
That'll be so great.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more information about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at complextraumatrainingcenter.com/transforming trauma. You can also connect with us in other ways. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. As a mental health professional, your commitment to healing and growth inspires us. We at the Complex Trauma Training Center are committed to supporting you in your well-being and success. That's why we're honored to invite you to our Space Program 2025, an inner development program of support and self-discovery for therapists on the personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal levels. Running over 6 online sessions in 2025, this interactive experiential learning program is designed to support self-care and self-discovery for therapists, exploring internally, relationally, and transpersonally. CTTC faculty will welcome you into a professional community of therapists that are seeking to create greater effectiveness and resilience in our professional lives. As CTTC faculty Brad Kammer says, the intent is that this program will help us not only become more effective therapists, but also love our work more. Please visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com and secure your spot in the 2025 Space Program. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Elisa Sponseller for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.